I think this game's premier experience has not been on the PS5 thus far.
Yeah.
It's been on PC. It's been on PC where you can use these very advanced upsampling solutions, where you can dial in a ton of ray tracing, where you can dial in very high quality ray tracing there. And so I was curious, and I think you were very, very curious about how the PS5 Pro version compares to some of the PC version's aspects here, because I think that is probably a point of comparison that people are invested in. And I think that comparing to PC can possibly tell us quite a bit about the PS5 Pro version actually here.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's interesting. Beyond just being novel because we do these things at DF, I think if we want to get to know a piece of hardware better, it's interesting to compare it to other things, especially in regards to PSSR, because this is like the first iterations of PSSR we're seeing in games right now. And to see maybe where its trajectory is in the future, you can compare it to things that we have on PC. Same with ray tracing performance and ray tracing features, where we have an idea of what's going on in the PlayStation 5 Pro, but it's a black box to us. On PC, we can turn things. Well, it's a white box actually, but or maybe it's a gray box if you bought that version. We can, comparing to the PC version gives us a better understanding of what we can maybe expect from PS5 Pro titles in the future, or what we can expect better from patches that come out. So that's why I compared to PC here. And the first thing I wanted to look at was DLSS versus PSSR. And the reason why we're doing that is because the previous comparisons that we've been able to do have really just been Ratchet and Clank. And that was one using dynamic resolution scaling, which is a bit annoying. Here we have a flat resolution. Another thing that's great about this title is we're dealing, especially in the performance mode here, with generally like low internal resolution being upscaled to something a lot higher. This is like a 2.5 times axis scale to 4K from that 854p, I believe it is, or is it 864p? I forget.
Yes.
up to 4K, and that is like a super hardcore upscale, and that is going to be testing like the limits of what this upscaling technology is capable of. Comparing there to DLSS is actually quite interesting. And to do the comparison, I looked primarily at that performance mode running PSSR, and I compared it to an RTX 4070 here running at the same quality settings using 864p internal resolution that I forced using the program MV Profile Inspector, because you can force internal resolutions for DLSS using that. And I'm also using the ultra performance scaling mode preset. Like there's different models inside DLSS that do different things, and NVIDIA has a specific one for resolution scales above 2 times axis scaling, which is called their ultra performance mode. So I'm using that model here. And the first comparisons were, well, like you were saying, like PSSR is not acquitting itself so great in this title, and maybe as a result of the low resolution, but when you compare to DLSS, like in this shot here, I think one of the biggest things you notice is that you said it didn't look particularly 4K. And if you compare DLSS, it actually looks a lot more 4K, because small details that are really smaller than a pixel in size are managed to be brought into the image. And so looking at this image, you can see in the forest, the fence that's kind of against the background of the sky here, you can actually resolve the detail of the individual interlinkings of the fence there on the DLSS view, which are unstable and almost blurred over a little bit in the PSSR view. Same thing with like other inner surface detail, like looking in the town in this shot here on the text on these signs. You can kind of see that for some reason PSSR almost like has like a soft softening of the entire image in comparison to DLSS, even though they're running obviously at the same internal resolution and upscaling to the same output of 4K. Another thing that you mentioned as well regarding the comparisons to even just to FSR2, like we see in this shot here, is that for some reason, and we're kind of seeing this a little bit in cross-title comparisons at the moment, looking at other titles too, when you just sit the camera still, as we're seeing here, there's just like a general shimmer or jitter or noise in the entire image on PSSR. And this one is a little bit strange to me, because usually with TAA, the issue is in movement and not when the camera is sitting still. And here it's like almost the opposite. Like it tends to do better when the camera's moving, but when the camera's still, you can really see a lot of instability And almost like you said, looks like film grain. If you like look really quickly, you can actually see like the jitter, I think too, of the like the subpixel jitter of the entire image. It just generally doesn't look very 4K like in comparison to DLSS, or is not very stable when the camera is sitting still. And now I think it's interesting to compare to DLSS here because there's been, for DLSS 2, like 4 years of iteration, and for DLSS in total, like 6 years of iteration. And we kind of see like the upward trajectory of where PSSR can be in the future, where at the moment it isn't like properly there when you look at these still images, but it could be up there in the future. And that's something that would be great to see. Another thing that I kind of wanted to point out was that, and we're kind of also seeing this in other games, is that like when you're moving, it's better than FSR2, but still like could be better. Like the camera moving here, like looking at the power lines or looking at Saga's hair, it's a bit more like pixels are sticking out more. They're showing their face more often, kind of like flickering in and out of the image. And there's a different level of stability there when things are movement. Or like when I push the camera forward here in this scene, you can see the same thing on like the left hand side of Saga there in regards to like the power lines or the trees or the signs and the amount of flickering and aliasing that comes up there. It's just generally not up to what we see on the right hand side of this image with DLSS. Kind of the last thing that I want to talk about, and that we're also seeing in cross-title comparisons at the moment, but not every title, is that for some effects on screen, like SSAO or volumetrics or SSR, PSSR is not intermeshing as well with them as the other techniques are. So like here in this scene, looking at the volumetric fog in the forest here. Now, usually volumetric fog in games is like kind of low res and it's amortized over multiple frames using TAA or something like TAA. And here it's like kind of like flickering or looking unstable on the PSSR side, which I don't even think happens necessarily too much with FSR. So it seemed like some sort of particular to PSSR issue here. But when we get to other titles in the future where we see something similar, we'll also point it out. The general appreciation and conclusion after doing a whole bunch of comparisons, and I did a lot of them, is that I think in this game in particular, it having low resolution post-processing in general probably isn't helping PSSR, but maybe for this output resolution of 4K, that PSSR isn't exactly a great fit at the moment. Like maybe it's like what we saw in Ratchet and Clank where it was at 1440p, it did a lot better job where the issues were not as noticeable. So it's not, I didn't think it was anywhere near on par with DLSS, but I didn't like that it was having like trading blows with FSR2 in your part of this presentation here. Like it just needs more iteration time, I feel, so that it's like beating FSR2 no matter what. And then it's in like a really great place. But at the moment right now, I think with comparisons to DLSS, we can see exactly where it could be in the future, and hopefully is in the future with more iteration and more updates and like a stronger model.
Yeah, I think that comparisons in my case with FSR2 are one thing. When you look at DLSS, it's kind of a very different world in terms of the consistency and stability that you can get out of an image, even a very low resolution image relative to the output like you're seeing there. But like you said, FSR and DLSS, they are fairly mature technologies at this point. They've been deployed in the wild for a long time. So I would expect that PSSR would improve over time. I do think that in some of those early games that we saw, we were seeing somewhat higher resolutions, and we were seeing game content and maybe implementations that were more favorable to PSSR there. And the games overall tended to look a little bit better in some of that Sony first party fare in particular, like your Ratchets, your
definitely
Spider-Mans, your The Last of Us Part 2s, where you are getting a bit of a better result, I would say, than we're seeing here. In this case, it's kind of like it's an interesting solution. It's trading blows with with FSR, but it's not really quite at that DLSS level. I don't know that we would expect it to be necessarily out of the gate, but I do think there is still some headroom for improvement here.